Padre Pio visits the former home of Donald Trump, but faces humiliation when trying to read the Bible. The news came unexpectedly. Amid his spiritual retreat, Padre Pio received an invitation that puzzled him, a special homage at Donald Trump's former mansion, organized by his daughters. The magnate, known for his power and influence, had not been seen in public for years, yet his legacy continued to echo through the corridors of politics and business. Despite his initial hesitation, Padre Pio felt in his heart that he should accept. There was something greater in that invitation, something he did not yet understand, but that God, in his infinite wisdom, had already determined. Upon arriving at the imposing residence, everything was exactly as expected. Luxury, sophistication, and an almost theatrical grandeur. Trump's daughters greeted him with respect, but without much enthusiasm. The event brought together influential personalities, business leaders, and renowned politicians. It all seemed to be merely an earthly celebration, focused on Trump's business trajectory. But Padre Pio, sensitive to the things of the spirit, perceived something beyond what human eyes could see. There was a palpable absence, a void that none of that opulence could fill. During the first moments, the priest observed discreetly. He spoke with some guests and noticed that, amid the laughter and toasts, there was a certain discomfort. Many seemed to avoid discussing Trump's final moments, as if something unresolved lingered in his departure. His daughters, although smiling at the guests, exchanged apprehensive glances among themselves. Something in that house seemed to disturb them, but no one dared speak about it. Then one of the daughters approached, and with a polite smile, thanked him for his presence. "It is an honor to have you here, Padre Pio. My father respected your history, but tonight we only want to celebrate the life he lived. No religious speeches, just good memories." The priest nodded calmly, yet he sensed an unspoken request in her words. They did not want him to speak about God. There was an invisible barrier there, an attempt to keep any spiritual reminder of Trump's past at bay. Even without responding directly, Padre Pio knew that his mission that night went beyond what had been planned by the organizers. God had sent him there for a reason. Deep in his soul, he felt that that house was still waiting for something, a truth that needed to be revealed. Something was about to happen. Padre Pio walked through the mansion's hall with his usual serenity. The golden chandeliers shone brightly, reflecting light onto guests dressed in impeccable attire. Champagne was being served in crystal glasses, and the sound of gentle instrumental music filled the space. However, as grand as everything seemed, something was out of place. The priest felt a weight in the air, an absence of peace that could not be ignored. He observed Trump's daughters from afar. They were always surrounded by people, yet there was discomfort in their eyes. Something troubled them, something they perhaps could not even explain themselves. Padre Pio had always been able to identify when a heart was restless. He had seen many powerful men try to fill the void of their soul with wealth and status, but none had escaped the spiritual truth that would eventually catch up with them. When one of the daughters approached again to reinforce the event's intention, she was more direct. "Padre, we respect your history, but tonight is about legacy, business, global impact. Our father was never one to mix religion with his endeavors. We want to keep this as a celebration." She said this in a courteous but firm tone. Padre Pio smiled softly and replied only with a look of understanding. He had heard such words before, from many people over the years. The conversation was interrupted when an elderly lady, seated discreetly on one of the sofas at the back, caught the priest's attention. She was one of the few present who did not seem impressed by all the ostentation. Her gaze was deep, as if she carried memories that no one there cared to relive. Crossing eyes with Padre Pio, she gave a slight nod. He approached. "You feel it too, don't you?" whispered the woman. The priest only nodded. The weight in the atmosphere seemed to increase. The mansion was a symbol of power, but at that moment it also seemed to be a place of something unresolved. Padre Pio knew that God was about to act, and that night would not end as Trump's daughters expected. Something there needed to be restored. Something greater than anyone in that room could comprehend. Padre Pio remained by the elderly woman's side for a few moments, feeling the growing unrest within himself. There was something in that house that was not at peace. He looked around, seeing Trump's daughters interacting with the guests, trying to keep control of the night. The event was meticulously planned to exalt the magnate's greatness, but nothing there seemed genuine. It was as if everyone was ignoring something that cried out in the silence of the soul. At a certain moment, feeling it was his duty, Padre Pio took his small Bible and gently opened it. He did not intend to give a speech or interrupt the celebration. He only wanted to share a few words of hope. But as soon as he did, the atmosphere seemed to change. The low murmur of the room diminished and some people began to pay attention. Before he could read, one of Trump's daughters quickly approached, forcing a smile. "Padre, I think this is not the right moment for that," she said, almost in a whisper. Padre Pio looked up and met her gaze. There was no anger or harshness in his expression, only a serene conviction. "My daughter, faith does not need proper moments. It always finds a way to manifest when it is needed," he replied calmly. But Trump's heiresses were not willing to give in so easily. "Our father was a man of business, Padre. He built an empire, inspired millions. People want to celebrate that, not hear religious sermons." The priest took a deep breath. It was not the first time he encountered resistance when speaking about God, but he knew that faith could not be imposed. It needed to be awakened. He closed the Bible calmly and placed it on a nearby table. "I understand," he said, without confrontation. "But there are things that not even the greatest of empires can avoid. Eternity is not measured in dollars or skyscrapers. In the end, we all stand before it." His words hung in the air, penetrating the hearts of some guests, who now looked at him with curiosity. Trump's daughters exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. They had not expected someone to challenge the tone of the night with such direct words. But before they could respond, an unexpected wind swept through the room, causing the curtains to sway slightly. The guests felt a chill, and for a brief moment, silence took over the mansion. Something was about to happen, something that no one there could predict. The wind that passed through the hall brought with it a sudden change in the atmosphere. The clinking of cutlery against plates ceased, and the whispers of the guests were replaced by a silence heavy with expectation. It was as if everyone, without understanding why, was waiting for something. Padre Pio remained still, his Bible still resting on the table. He did not seem surprised. On the contrary, his serene expression indicated that he had already been expecting it. Then the elderly lady, seated at the back of the room, cleared her throat and called everyone's attention. Her voice was weak, but carried an unusual authority. "Perhaps we should listen to him," she said slowly, looking directly at Trump's daughters. The simple comment made them exchange uneasy glances. "With all due respect, madam, tonight is about our father, about his journey and his legacy," one of them replied, trying to maintain composure. The elderly woman smiled softly, as if she had anticipated that response. "And you think that faith was not part of his journey?" Her words lingered in the air like an inconvenient truth. Some people in the room began to murmur, and the discomfort grew. The wind that had earlier merely stirred the curtains now intensified, causing one of the candles on the table to flicker dangerously. One of Trump's daughters laughed nervously and crossed her arms. "It's just a ventilation issue," she said, trying to dispel the strange atmosphere. But something was different. The breeze carried a subtle scent, like a blend of flowers and old wood, a comforting and familiar aroma for some, yet inexplicable for all. Some guests began to exchange glances, feeling an inexplicable shiver run down their spines. Padre Pio observed everything in silence, yet his eyes shone with a mix of understanding and reverence. He knew that the divine presence often manifested in subtle ways before revealing itself completely. The moment was interrupted by a sharp crack. Everyone turned their heads toward the bookshelf next to the fireplace, where a picture frame had just fallen by itself onto the marble floor. The sound echoed through the hall, causing everyone present to hold their breath. When one of the daughters bent down to pick it up, her face lost color. In the photograph, Donald Trump was holding something that no one expected to see, an open Bible with a serious and contemplative expression. The silence that took over the mansion was absolute. Something, or someone, was trying to say something. The entire hall seemed suspended in time. The photograph of Trump holding the Bible was an image that none of the guests expected to see. His daughters were paralyzed, their faces showing confusion and a certain fear. They exchanged quick glances, as if trying to find a logical explanation for what they saw, but there was none. The wind continued to blow softly, carrying that mysterious floral scent that no one could identify. Padre Pio remained silent, his hands clasped in prayer, waiting. He knew that this was only the beginning of something greater. One of Trump's daughters forced a laugh, trying to break the tension. "It's just a funny coincidence, that's all," she said, putting the picture back on the shelf. "Our father was always a practical man. He may have had respect for religion, but it was never essential to him." Her tone sounded convincing, but her eyes revealed doubts. Finally, Padre Pio spoke, his voice soft yet firm. "People hide their faith in different ways, but it never disappears. At the right moment, God always reminds us where we come from." His words made some of the guests nod slowly in agreement. Then it happened. At the back of the hall, a deep, familiar sound echoed among the guests. "Let him speak." The voice was unmistakable. Everyone froze. The blood drained from the faces of Trump's daughters. One of the security guards quickly looked around, trying to find the source of the sound, but there was no one who could have spoken those words. Patricia, the most skeptical of the sisters, felt her heart race. Was that a trick?" she whispered to one of her sisters, though her voice faltered with nervousness. The entire hall was in shock. Some guests slowly retreated, fearing that something supernatural was happening. Others were simply paralyzed, their eyes wide with incredulity. Padre Pio, however, remained unshaken. He looked at Trump's daughters and said calmly, "You heard, didn't you?" They did not answer, but the fear in their eyes confirmed the truth. Something impossible had occurred. The tension was broken by a sudden sound. The double doors leading to the mansion's balcony opened by themselves, as if an invisible wind had pushed them. The floral scent intensified, spreading throughout the space. Some guests held their breath, feeling a shiver run down their spines. Padre Pio slowly stood up and took his Bible. He opened it to a specific page and, in his calm voice, read, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him." Revelation 3:20. The entire hall remained in absolute silence. The verse was clear. Someone was there and was calling. Padre Pio's words lingered in the air like a deep echo, reverberating in the hearts of those present. The mansion, once filled with empty conversations and forced laughter, was now shrouded in a sacred silence. Trump's daughters stood still, unable to process what had just happened. The wind blowing through the open doors was light, but carried something inexplicable, a call that could not be ignored. Patricia, the most skeptical of the sisters, finally broke the silence. This can't be real," she murmured, her voice trembling. She looked to her sisters for support, but found only frightened and perplexed expressions. It was then that the elderly lady, who had remained discreet all night, got up with difficulty and walked over to Padre Pio. Her eyes shone with a certainty that no one else seemed to have. "You were too young to remember," said the woman, her voice laden with emotion. "But I was by your father's side for years. He never had to say it out loud, but he always carried his faith. He read the Bible in silence, prayed when no one was looking. He knew that in the end, everything we build here means nothing if we forget about eternity." Her words hit the sisters like an unexpected blow. They exchanged glances, and doubt began to transform into something deeper. Patricia took a deep breath, still reluctant. "If he believed, why did he never talk about it with us?" Her voice sounded more like an appeal than a question. The elderly lady smiled sadly. "Because sometimes people protect what is most sacred to them. But now he wants you to know." It was then that one of the sisters, who had remained silent until that moment, pointed to the fallen photograph. "I've never seen that picture before," she murmured. Time seemed to slow down as everyone looked again at the image of Trump holding the Bible. It was as if, for years, they had ignored an essential piece of their father's history. Padre Pio closed his eyes for a moment, and then opened them with a serene glow. Faith does not need to be forced, but when God gives us signs, it is up to us to decide whether we want to see them. Trump's daughters said nothing, but something in their eyes had changed. They were no longer just trying to understand. For the first time, they were feeling. The mansion, once filled with voices and toasts, was now enveloped in a silence that carried something sacred. Trump's daughters were still visibly shaken, trying to process everything that had happened, the fallen photograph, the unmistakable voice of their father echoing in the hall, and the breeze that seemed to bring a call from beyond. None of them could explain it, but denial was no longer an option. Something greater than any of them had manifested there. Patricia held her father's photo with trembling hands, noticing a detail she had never observed before, the open Bible resting in his firm hands. She looked at her sisters, who were visibly upset, and then turned her gaze to Padre Pio. "I never imagined that my father had this side," she whispered. The elderly lady, who had remained by the priest's side, nodded softly. "Sometimes faith is silent, but that does not make it any less real." The wind that had been blowing through the room subsided, and a comforting warmth filled the space. It was as if, for the first time in years, the mansion was at peace. Padre Pio watched the sisters for a moment, and without saying a word, picked up his Bible again. He opened it calmly and read, "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. The words seemed to come alive in the silence of the room, resonating not only in the ears but in the hearts of everyone present. One of the sisters, who until then had avoided any display of emotion, brought her hands to her face, trying to hold back tears. "I feel that there is something here, but I can't explain it," she confessed. Another sister squeezed Patricia's arm, seeking support. It wasn't just fear or disbelief. For the first time, they felt something greater than themselves, a call to see beyond what they had always believed was the only truth. Padre Pio smiled gently. He knew he did not need to say anything more. God was already at work in their hearts. Faith is not born of arguments or impositions, but from encounters, from signs, and from moments when the soul realizes it is facing the inexplicable. And there, that night, Trump's heiresses had received their first true calling. What they would do with it now was up to them. The hall remained enveloped in an almost sacred silence. The weight of the night, once filled with tension and skepticism, now gave way to something different. Trump's daughters, still visibly shaken, seemed to carry in their eyes a new glimmer, a mix of emotion, doubt, and discovery. For the first time, they were facing a truth they had never considered, their father's own faith. Patricia looked again at the photo in her hands. The father, who had always been a symbol of strength and power, now seemed different to her. Had they, all these years, ignored the more human side of Trump? She raised her eyes to Padre Pio, her voice hesitant. I don't know what to think." The priest smiled patiently. "There is no need to think. Just feel." His words hung in the air, laden with meaning. It was at that moment that a new sound echoed through the room. A soft snap. Everyone turned toward the bookshelf. A second picture frame, previously well secured, slid and fell to the floor. The impact made a few people jump. Patricia bent down to pick it up, her heart racing. When she turned the frame over to see the photo, she felt a chill run down her spine. It was an old image, one that none of them remembered having seen before. Trump was seated in his office, and on the table before him was the same Bible that Padre Pio now held. The sisters exchanged looks, utterly speechless. Then, out of nowhere, a soft sound rippled through the hall. A deep, familiar laugh, laden with nostalgia. Trump's laugh. The air seemed to freeze for an instant. The guests held their breath. Patricia covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes welling with tears. "Father?" she whispered, her voice faltering. The wind blew lightly one last time, and the doors that had been opened began to close slowly, as if someone were leaving. Padre Pio looked at the sisters, his expression calm. "He was never far away," he said softly. "He was only waiting for you to be ready to listen." Patricia took a deep breath, holding the photo tightly. Her heart, which had once been full of resistance, was now open. "Read," she said, almost in a whisper. "Read once more." The priest nodded and opened the Bible. With his serene voice he proclaimed, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. The entire hall remained silent. But it was a different silence now. There was no more fear, nor doubt, only peace. Patricia and her sisters said nothing further, but something within them had changed forever. Padre Pio smiled gently and closed his Bible. His mission there was complete. If this story touched your heart, Share it with someone who needs this message of faith. Subscribe for more inspiring stories of miracles and overcoming challenges. Join our community to strengthen your faith and be inspired by real-life testimonies.